What's going on, everyone? Thank you so much for tuning in to another episode of the Ducks Dish podcast. I'm your host, Max Torres with ScoopDuck on 3, coming to you on Wednesday, January 22nd, 2025. We got another edition of the Oregon Recruiting Hour for you in store today. Anything recruiting related goes, but we'll also talk some big picture Duck stuff as we kind of turn the page from the 2024 season to 2025 following the conclusion of the national championship game, which was, of course, held earlier this week. And joining me is ScoopDuck owner and publisher Justin Hopkins. J-Hop, how are you?
Good. Excited for us to be able to get back and into doing another one of these. I know we're trying to be back to regular on them, and also excited to just kind of get cranking in on this 2026 class that we're working on too.
And I think that's one of the big things that has been at the forefront of my mind and will certainly be all over the coverage that we have over at scoopduck.com. Just a reminder, you guys can try us out for 7 days for just $1. So make sure you check us out over there if you haven't read us before and you're just here on the ScoopDuck YouTube channel or on the pod. But the 2026 class is up. They are taking center stage. You talk about this cycle, quote unquote. I guess it's still technically 2025, but we're really not expecting a whole lot between now and the February signing period. So I don't know about you, Justin, but I'm probably going to be treating this cycle as 2025 moving forward.
Yeah, I think that's the way Oregon's looking at it. As you can see, coaches have been out on the road making stops, and all the stops are for 2026 and beyond recruits. So I think Dane Lanning's pretty happy with what they did in this 2025 class. I think they're pretty happy with what they did in the transfer portal in that winter window that just completed. And I think they're working on 26s and getting ready for spring ball, which I know it sounds stupid. It sounds dumb, but you give it about a month and a long week and you'll have spring ball. So just before you know it, spring football will be back and recruiting will be going alongside with it. So it'll be exciting.
And maybe that's a note that we can pass along for our listeners too, Justin, because not everybody eats, sleeps, and breathes Oregon recruiting like you and I do. But even though this is the quote unquote off season, this is a pretty crucial time for recruiting. We're going to talk about some of these recruits that the staff is on the road seeing throughout the country. And then we know, of course, Oregon has their big junior day recruiting weekend this upcoming weekend, and then one more weekend of visits looking likely before recruiting goes dead for basically the entire month of February after that first weekend. So really, really important time if you're a Duck fan to make sure that you're following along.
Yeah, I don't want to oversell anything. The month of February will be pretty dry. I admit that. It's a time for you to maybe get your taxes done, start doing your spring cleaning at your house. I don't know. There won't be a ton going on. And along with that is a very important time for the team. And what I mean by that is the coaches, they take vacations in February and they need them. I mean, we both know these guys have been on the go, on the road, in team meetings nonstop. February is the month where these guys have an opportunity to totally decompress and take some time off. So, I won't sell you that February is going to be anything to shout about, but the next week here with this huge junior day, and then we'll have interviews from that'll carry us into the first week or two of February. And then next thing you know, bam, March is back up, recruiting kicks back up, and we'll be rolling into spring football. So February can be for basketball. We could get back into some men's basketball stuff, and they're having a good year, women's basketball. So there won't be anything, won't be like there's nothing. It just, there won't be a lot for football.
There you go. Okay. Well, let's start things off with one of the very biggest targets on Oregon's big board in the 2026 class. Always fun to talk some quarterback, right, Justin? Let's talk about Folsom, California, 2026 quarterback Ryder Lyons. I mean, this dude is an absolute game changer if you've ever seen one at quarterback. Throughout the season, I felt like it was week after week. The dude was just putting on jaw-dropping plays and highlights. The way he can navigate the pocket, buy himself time is just incredible. And the Oregon staff has now gone out to visit him at Folsom twice during this January contact period, recruiting period. And based on some of the latest intel that I've been hearing, I wrote this and shared it with our readers when I was in San Antonio a little bit ago. I think Oregon's gained some ground in this recruitment, and they're battling the likes of Ole Miss and BYU here. We know, of course, that Ryder's taken a mission trip and plans to be with the school that he chooses in time for the 2027 season. But definitely a good development for Will Stein and the Ducks to really kind of pick up some ground here.
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty clear Oregon's all in on Ryder Lyons. And, of course, they're still recruiting Jared Curtis as well. But the reason I say all in is because, there's a picture floating around that, Dan Lanning brought several of his offensive coaches with him to see Ryder this week at Folsom. So, I mean, there's a picture of him with Will Stein and Alik Terry, and I think Drew Maringer are the three offensive coaches that were with Dan Lanning in the picture. That's a priority right there. You don't send, 4 coaches to a school for somebody that, you don't think you got a shot with and that you're not really prioritizing. So, that right there just confirms, the feeling there. And what makes this interesting is the fact that if you go and you look at the commit list, just on the commit list alone, should it work this way, Oregon could land 3 quarterbacks in the 2026 class. And like you said, Ryder's really not a 2026 quarterback. That's the classification he's going to be under, but he's going to take that mission. So he's a year removed from anybody else that Oregon might land in the 26 class at quarterback. So obviously they've got Jonas Williams committed. Oregon's in the top 2, worst case, top 3 for Jared Curtis, another 5-star quarterback. And then there's Lyons as well, who's a high 4-star, I believe, on most of the services. So again, they could take all 3. If I know somebody's going to ask the question, they could take all 3. And that is because Lyons will be taking his mission out of high school.
Can't really go wrong with California quarterbacks, and I think that Lyons is a guy Oregon looks at, and they think that this is someone they can really win a national championship with. So certainly a big name to keep an eye on here. I do have my on 3 RPM on USC, but I placed that during the season, and it doesn't feel like, from what I've heard, that USC is as clearly in the driver's seat as they had been at one point in this recruitment. So that doesn't mean that that USC isn't going to ultimately land him, or maybe he isn't his leader. But I think Oregon's done a really good job, like I mentioned, to gain some ground here. So Ryder Lyons is certainly a name you have to know if you're an Oregon fan that likes to follow recruiting. Let's talk about another blue chip guy, Justin. Probably the biggest target. I don't think the target's get any bigger for Oregon in the 2026 class than modern days Chris Henry. And he's going to be coming back to Eugene this weekend for another visit, an unofficial visit. And it kind of seems like he's been working from a top 2 of Ohio State and Oregon, unofficial top 2, right? We know, of course, that he's been committed to Ohio State for a while. He's from the state of Ohio. But when you're talking about schools that have a legit shot to pull off of a flip here, these are his sophomore highlights because he got hurt in his junior year. Oregon's right there at the top of the list.
Yeah, Oregon's repeatedly mentioned, by Henry, by other analysts as the biggest threat to Ohio State. But here we are. I mean, we're talking about this in January. And like you said, as a young man's been committed to Ohio State for a long time. As we know, the Buckeyes just won a national championship. It's going to make it even harder for Oregon to pull them away when they've just won a national championship. So I don't expect any major movement here at all with Henry other than visits. Him coming back to Oregon is great. I mean, that's great. Oregon should just keep chopping wood, developing relationships, keep working on him. This is a guy you just want to kind of stay the course with for a long time. So I think, you look at him taking visits to Oregon, and I think he'll take other visits too. But right now, Oregon's the threat. And if you're Dan Lanning, if you're Junior Adams, you just want to kind of keep getting him on campus when you can. Maybe, try getting him to integrate with some of your commits as best you can. Obviously, Oregon's already got a modern day commit in Cody Green there. Get those guys that kind of work on him a little bit, and you play the long game. So, Oregon fans are hoping for Chris Henry to flip tomorrow or this weekend. I don't think that'll happen, but you don't need him to. There's a long ways to go. It's January, and I think you just kind of stay the course if you're Oregon.
Yeah, there's a long way to go here. I anticipate that Henry's recruitment will be one that goes to the very end if he does, in fact, sign during the early signing period. Like we talked about, Justin, the 2026 class is on the clock. It feels like not too long ago we were just talking about the 2025 early signing period, but now we're less than 11, maybe we're right around 11 months from the 2026's signing their letters of intent or financial aid agreement, whatever you want to call it these days. But getting Henry back on campus is certainly a good development. I'm with you. I don't think this means anything is imminent. I know he wants to kind of get out and take some SEC trips as well. So you have to figure Texas, Alabama, your usual suspects are going to be kind of involved in this recruitment, the heavy hitters in the world of recruiting. But Oregon's building as good of a pipeline to modern day as any school in the country, with Cody Green, who you mentioned, Tamuhini Tapui, the defensive lineman, also already in the fold in 2026. And we can talk a little bit more about Green and some of those other guys a bit later on in this pod, but wanted to make sure we kind of hit on two of the biggest names in this class right off the bat, and in Henry and Lyons.
Yeah, they don't get much bigger than either of those guys. And I know I talked about him, during the Lions segment, but, Jared Curtis is up there too. Those are three, elite guys. And I don't know, maybe we live in a world where Oregon could land all three of those guys. That would definitely, that would be something, but it's pretty early for all of them. I think in the case of Henry, it'll be a while. I think even Lyons, he's already set up some official visits in June. So again, you're just, laying the foundation there and continuing to develop relationships as you recruit those guys.
Yeah, I'll add that I think Lyons said he's planning to take at least 3 official visits to Oregon, USC, and BYU. I believe that recent interview, of course, is over on ScoopDuck. You might have to dig a little bit, but it's there. Or you can just find Ryder Lyons' profile on On3, scroll down, and then you'll find my story. One of the other things I think is kind of fun to touch on here, Justin, as we really put this 2026 class into focus, is what I wrote about it yesterday, but just kind of the edge that Oregon has, or one of the big differences that we've seen already in this 2026 recruiting class, which ranks number 1 nationally according to On3, 10 verbal commitments, is the fact that Oregon has already done so much heavy lifting. If you've followed recruiting for a while, you know that a majority of the heavy lifting when it comes to recruiting is done in the spring and summer months. And when the season comes around, you already have a majority of your class locked in. And Oregon's in a great spot here. And a lot of that is because they were able, Dan Lanning, Marsha Malco, the rest of the staff at Oregon, they were able to recruit 2 classes simultaneously, which in my time following or covering recruiting, I don't think we've ever seen the Ducks do that at this high of a level. And I think that that's kind of what separates good from great in today's world.
Yeah, it's the next wave of recruiting. It's it's an odd thing, to be recruiting these guys at such an early age and so early in the cycle. But I mean, that's the nature of the beast. It's I've said it before, it's adapt or die. So, Alabama, Georgia, Texas, everybody else doing it too. I mean, we're seeing junior days at most of these major schools here in January, and that's becoming commonplace. So that's something that didn't used to happen at all. That was, it used to be like June was early, and now January, is the time. So, and that's the thing. I think, one of the things on educating fans, especially Oregon fans, I think SEC fans are a little bit, used to some of this stuff. But when it comes to recruiting and the level Oregon's recruiting, this is a year-round thing. This is not where you used to tune in September or October and see who signed with Oregon in December. Dan Lanning, these guys are going to have the heavy lifting done on this class, by June or July. They're going to have some visitors this fall. It's going to be more. Here's the thing. It'll be more 2027 visitors this fall than 2026 visitors. So let that sink in. We're talking about this in January of 2025, and the class that's going to sign basically 11 months from now. You'll see more of the next class. Yeah, that next class. Yeah, another year out from that, on campus. So, it's an important time to tune in. And to me, I always like following these recruiting stories. It's fun to see it play out. It's fun to kind of learn about these guys, and the more interviews that we can get on them, the more profile we can get where it's not just about football, it's about things they like to do in their off time or whatever the case might be, or about their parents, whatever. So that's kind of why I preach to people like this is a year-round thing. And if you only tune in from August to December, you're missing on a huge chunk of Oregon football, in my opinion.
Couldn't agree more. Recruiting does not stop, even in the dead period months. I think there's still stuff that we can find to cover, interviews that we can do, and the like. So just because the football season's over doesn't mean that you can take your foot off the gas, whether you're a fan or a coach at Oregon. One of the other guys that I want to talk about here, Justin, that is headed to Eugene this weekend, is one of the very best defensive linemen, very best prospects in Northern California, and that is Concord, California, De La Salle defensive lineman Nehemiah Tona. If you guys read us at ScoopDuck, this name isn't new to you because he got offered in the fall, and we had an interview talking with Tona about what this meant for him. He's definitely one of the gems out there in Northern California playing that powerhouse De La Salle, which has sent some pretty good guys to Oregon. Obviously, you have TJ Ward. Tosh Lapoy, the defensive coordinator, played not at Oregon, but did play at De La Salle. And the Ducks did sign Matthew Johnson in the 2025 recruiting class, another defensive lineman from De La Salle and teammates with Tona. But he's taken a trip to Oregon this week, and it seems like Oregon might be picking up some steam here in this recruitment.
Yeah, I mean, I think, if you're looking at a program and you're taking we'll just kind of call it a bit of a flyer on a developmental prospect, you're going to do it on a defensive lineman, right? There are certain positions where you'll do that. And I say that not that this is a bad player or anything like that, but he's not the, top 20, 5-star, 4-star kind of guy that fans get giddy about talking about all the time. Because let's face it, rankings are fun and signing 5 stars is fun. But, these are sort of those guys in the program that a Bryce Betcher comes to mind, right? Bryce Betcher was not a 5-star by any means and was ultimately a baseball player. But these are the guys that end up on your team that you're like, oh, man, I can get behind this guy. He's pretty good. Jamari Caldwell really wasn't a big signing out of the transfer portal last year and became a guy that, Oregon depended on. So, that's the case here. Obviously, Oregon took Matt Johnson from De La Salle last year. Looking at this again, if you go and you get a prospect like this out of California, not only are you getting a guy on your team that you can work with and try and develop and see what you got, you keep him away from USC, you keep him away from Washington, you keep him away from Cal, so you hurt your opponent in the process. So, again, I know, obviously Brandon Huffman of 24/7 Sports put in a crystal ball here. Neither one of us have done that yet, but that pick makes a lot of sense, and these are the kind of guys that. I remember a time when USC used to offer people and they would jump on their offer and commit right away. Well, Oregon, has some guys that still do that, as well. And they tend to be guys that fit this kind of profile.
And the other thing that I think is interesting with Tona is that he plays both ways. And that's not uncommon in high school football nowadays, but it's definitely kind of the standard at De La Salle. So if you're taking a guy that can play the position at a high level on both sides of the ball, rather, and then he can just focus in as a defensive lineman and really kind of find that next level, I think that that's awesome. But you can just see from the tape here, if you're watching on the YouTube channel, Justin, the raw power that Tona brings to the table and just the ability to shed blockers and also be an impact guy in the run. I think that that's exactly what you're looking for in your defensive lineman. So he certainly checks all of those boxes. He's 6'2", closing in on 300 pounds. So you don't find a whole lot of those guys on the West Coast. A lot of times you have to go kind of out to Utah or to the South to find those big bodies in the trenches. But the Bay Area has been kind to Oregon, and they're going to make sure that they are aware of top talent each and every cycle. And of course, you have to think that Tosh Lapoy at Oregon probably gives the Ducks a slight edge here.
Well, and with the way Oregon's roster is currently at defensive line at the interior position, this isn't a guy that needs to come in and play right away. Like, you've got several young guys that either redshirted or are true freshmen or whatever on this roster at the interior of the defensive line that will play the next 2 to 3 years. So this is a guy you can bring in and let him develop for a year or two and work him into the rotation. And he doesn't have to come in and be the guy right away. So, those are things that Oregon has afforded themselves the ability to do that USC and others cannot, because they don't have that level of depth, at least at this position group. So, something to kind of keep in mind. It doesn't, not everyone has to be a 4-star top 100 guy, because of the way that they've recruited these past cycles.
Look no further than Toby Hastrup, who was a 4-star in the 2025 cycle, but it is a little bit of a quote unquote flyer because he is newer to the game. You guys probably know his story, but in case you don't, was born in London, moved to the US, and has only played one full season of football. So Oregon's taken a bit of a flyer there, but it feels weird calling him a flyer because he was an All-American that I saw out in San Antonio. That was pretty much what I had for recruiting, Justin. Unless you had anything else that you kind of wanted to throw in here before we transition to our next topic.
No, I mean, just I think I don't know if the next topic includes the junior day, but I mean, that's the thing. I know we've talked about it a little bit, but I mean, this junior day this weekend is going to have, at least a half dozen 5-stars on campus, depending on which service you look at. I mean, it's going to have probably close to 15 top 100 level players. Like, it's going to be one of the biggest groups of the year. So, that's something that alone, this weekend alone, is worth kind of staying tuned and seeing what's going on, because, leading up to the weekend, there will be a lot of names that pop in, and then coming out of the weekend, obviously you and I will be working on getting these guys on the phone and asking them about their visit and where Oregon stands. So,
yeah, I think I didn't have a whole lot to add about the junior day. I mean, I think we've kind of hit on some good stuff with it so far, but it's just, I think between now and maybe the spring game, this is probably going to be Oregon's most significant collection of talent that they're going to be hosting on one single weekend. And we can't discount that they have a number of high profile commits coming back. Cody Green from Modern Day, I just wrote an update with him over on ScoopDuck, recently got offered by Texas, but he's pretty locked in with Oregon still. It was cool because he said that he has kept an open dialogue with the coaches and is just taking these trips to make sure that Oregon's the place for him. And I don't think you can ever fault a kid for that. So he's coming back. Caden Dixon-Wyatt, Chris Henry, 2 other Modern Day guys are going to be there. Kendra Harrison, Oregon's headliner in the 2026 class, all the way out of North Carolina. That's not an easy trip for any recruit to make. So getting him on campus is obviously incredibly valuable. And the more commits you can get on campus in a weekend such as this really helps, because those are peer recruits. And oftentimes the coaches can only do so much. I think there's an incredible value with recruits talking to other high school players that are in their shoes saying, hey, why did you commit to Oregon? What was your experience like? Why do you think this is a place that I should consider? All of that stuff is I think, incredibly valuable as well.
Yeah, this to me is what I would call, and I just thought of this, but this is what I would call a foundation weekend, right? This, and what I mean by that is it's early January. Your own commits are going to look around and take some other visits, because it's 11 months before they sign. A lot can happen. We haven't even gone through the season yet. Coaching changes can happen. Bad seasons can happen. Who knows? But this is a foundation weekend. And what I mean by that is you're not going to come out of this weekend with a bunch of commits. And that's not the goal here. The goal is not that you and I are writing commit stories all day, Sunday, Monday, and Tuesday, because it's early January. Your goal here is to set a foundation if you're Oregon, if you're Dan Lanning and Marshall Malco, and say, hey, look, thanks for coming out. I hope you guys had a good weekend. We brought as many really good players out here as we could get that fit the schedule. We want you back in March. We want you to come out and watch us practice. We want you to come out in April for the spring game. This is that foundation weekend that sets you, gives you the opportunity to do that and improves your odds of getting them back. So I think it's important that you and I, and I always try to do this, or I try to remember to do this. It's important that you and I educate fans on some of these things instead of, oh, they had all these kids on campus and none of them committed. Right. That happens. Guess what? That's kind of what this weekend is about, more than, hey, let's get 5 commits and have 15 commits by February. Doesn't really do you a ton of good. So
yeah, that's the way that Oregon likes to work is you get a guy on campus for multiple unofficials, and then you can get him back, you would hope, for an official. Maybe that's in June during prime official visit season, or maybe it's a guy that you can get back on campus unofficially, and then you can hold that official visit for those more high profile guys for later on in the season. I think that's all at play. The last thing that I'll add here is some of these guys are going to be taking their first trip out to Oregon. A guy like a Brandon Arrington Jr. from the San Diego area, 5-star athlete in the 2026 class. He was kind of supposed to come out during the bye week last season, but that didn't end up happening. So now Oregon's trying to gain some ground with a guy like him, battling USC, Texas A&M, and hopefully that lays the groundwork for them to get him back on campus, like you had mentioned, Justin. So that's all important stuff there. The last topic I had for us today on the show was way too early top 25s, right? Now that the season's over, Ohio State defeated Notre Dame for the national championship on Monday. Now you have next season kind of far away, but we're still talking about it. And we have on threes Andy Staples and Ari Wasserman with their kind of combined top 25 here, which I'll just list off the top 5. You have Texas at 1, Ohio State at 2, Oregon at 3, Penn State at 4, and then the reigning defending runner-ups, Notre Dame at 5. So clearly no lack of confidence, no shortage of confidence, I should say, for Oregon going ahead to next year and kind of assuming here that Dante Moore is going to be the heir apparent to Dylan Gabriel at quarterback.
Yeah, and so I'm going to assume that basically I finished the article and hopped right on here with you. Probably most people haven't read. I did my own. Everybody else doing it, so I did my own way too early top 25. And I love that you have the graphic up there because ultimately my top 5 doesn't look that much like theirs. A little bit, but not at all. And I've actually got Penn State at number 1. I think I'm one of the few people to do that. And I'm probably not the biggest James Franklin fan out there, and I think I've voiced that on several times. He has trouble winning the big games, but being objective and looking what he's bringing back on the offensive side of the football, Drew Aller, obviously both the running backs, they're returning a lot of really good pieces at Penn State. They're going to make a run, and so I put them at number 1 just because in my mind, at this moment, here we are in January, I probably have the most faith, if you will, in that team. They did lose their DC, fully aware of that. I know they need to hire a defensive coordinator, but James Franklin actually does a really good job hiring coaches and coordinators, so I'll trust that he gets that done. And just so everybody knows, my top 3 is all Big Ten. It's Penn State, Oregon, Ohio State. Those 3 in that order. And, for me, I feel like at moments I'm too high on Oregon. I have concerns about the offensive line coming together the same as others. They're redoing the entire back end of the secondary. I agree that I think that there's going to need to be some chemistry there, but I think overall the talent in the room is better. So yeah, I put Oregon at number 2 just because of the schedule. I've got Ohio State at 3 simply because they are sending a ton of dudes in the NFL this year, and that's going to be really hard to replace. They're still going to be a great team. I don't think they'll have any drop off at quarterback. Will Howard played well down the stretch, but it wasn't like Will Howard won them that national championship. He basically just didn't commit turnovers is really all he did to win that. So not to discredit him, but I'm saying he's replaceable. It's not like he's a generational quarterback. For me, a lot of people are high on Texas, and you can see on this graphic here, if you're watching on YouTube, they've got Texas at number 1. I got Texas all the way at number 6 in mine. Steve, I think here's why. I think the Texas team this year, I don't know if you agree with me, I think the Texas team this year is more talented than the team that Steve Sarkisian has coming next year. And they couldn't beat very many of the good teams or any of the good teams, right? How are they going to be better? Is Arch Manning that much better than Quinn Ewers? They're losing some really good defensive players, defensive line players.
Both your tackles, Kelvin Banks, Cam Williams.
Yeah. So, for me, I have a really hard time seeing how people are putting Texas so high. Now, I have them at number 6, so it's not like I've said Texas is going to suck, write them off. I have them at number 6. I just don't think they deserve to be at number 1. I do, however, and so just to finish my top 5, it's Penn State, Oregon, Ohio State. At 4, I have Florida, which most people are like, what, J-Hop? Like, dude, go look at the nuts and bolts of that Florida team. It looks a lot like Ohio State did 2 years ago. Like he's bringing back a lot of very young players that are very good. DJ Lagway is going to be a really good quarterback for Florida. They have a little bit of a tough schedule, which gives me pause. but they hit the transfer portal right. That brought in some really good pieces in recruiting. Florida, I think, made the absolute right choice keeping Billy Napier and keeping that team from imploding. And I think they're going to be really good and really dangerous. Finishing out my top 5 is Georgia. I've got Georgia at 5. They weren't that good this year. I have a really tough time believing Kirby Smart will have a mediocre season 2 years in a row because he's Kirby Smart. I could be wrong, but that feels like the safe bet to me.
Yeah, it like Georgia, Ohio State, and now Texas, I think those are relatively safe bets just because you know how high the floor is going to be because of the way those guys kill it in talent acquisition every year. That's just kind of a given. And Oregon is right there with them. Obviously, there's a lot of confidence in Dante Moore. The biggest question mark, I think, for me, it isn't just the defensive or the offensive line, excuse me. You're going to be bringing in a whole bunch of new starters, and we saw how shaky Oregon started last year with new offensive line starters. But for me, it's going to be how much can that secondary, that back end, take a step forward, and can they do a better job containing Ohio State's wide receivers or any of the elite wideouts that they run into? Because we've seen these last 2 years. Sure, Jeremiah Smith's a generational talent, but in 2023, they couldn't really keep pace with the Washington receivers. So I'm just curious to see how much they can kind of take a step forward in the secondary. And they certainly have a ton of talent kind of waiting in the wings, and they're trying to supplement that with some of these guys from the transfer portal. For this graphic, I'm excited about number 8, South Carolina with Lenoris Sellers. I'm kind of high on South Carolina. I just I feel like they're a gutsy team that you don't want to play kind of week in and week out. And how about Dillingham getting some love of Arizona State at 17? And then BYU at number 16. I think Kalani Sitake is really building a good program over there as well. So there's going to be plenty to talk about this offseason and more transfer portal moves in the spring as we get to that. But I'm kind of happy the season's over to a degree because we can kind of decompress and I can really hone in on recruiting. But I'm going to be excited to get to next season, get to the spring, and hopefully I'll be getting out to some tournaments, some 7-on-7 tournaments, some camps here in the Southern California area. So there's going to be plenty to do on my end. But Justin, I'm just excited to get to next season. And it's like the off season's cool because for me, I like getting to be around a ton of recruits at like a tournament or a camp that I normally wouldn't be able to get around. And then just the anticipation that comes with all the build up to the next year.
It's the anticipation. That's what brings us all back. I mean, that's what keeps us as fans, right? I mean, if you're a fan of a school, I'll just throw it out there. If you're an Oregon State fan, it's rough, right? There's not much anticipation. I think if you're an Oregon State fan, the hope is that you're better than you were last year, and that's the goal. And for Oregon, I think it's, hey, look, there's going to be a lot of new pieces in Eugene. It's going to be a new year. It's going to be a different era at quarterback. I think Dante Moore is going to be different than the previous 2 quarterbacks, Dylan Gabriel and Bo Nix. That's obvious, but his skill set is different is what I mean. So what does that do to the offense? Is it a different dynamic? I think there's just so much excitement. And then knowing that the guys coming in now that maybe haven't played a ton, but have been in the program for a year or two, they're Dan Lanning's guys. Like it's kind of finally his chance to really have more of his infusion that he's recruited and brought in and developed than he's been allowed to have so far. I mean, everybody wants to, the USCs or whatever losers want to take shots at Dan Lanning for living in the transfer portal. Well, I can tell you this, it's been a lot more fun winning 12 games, 13 games, conference championships or whatever, because he brought in those talent and had the awareness and foresight to do so, than it would be winning 7 games or whatever, USC and Washington, whatever won. So that's not a knock. That just really solidifies where I stand with Dan Lanning, the fact that he sees a vision and knows how to, manage a roster, which is really important. So now he kind of gets the chance to maybe dial back on the transfer portal, which we've seen already in this last cycle. And we'll get to see that next wave of talent and what they can do. So, because this is where Oregon football kind of changes a little bit for Dan Lanning. And we could have a whole pod on this later on, but just the fact that these guys that have been in the program now will have bigger roles as starters or as key contributors than they have at any point so far. And that's exciting because I think like you, Max, myself, we talk to recruits. You talk to more than I do at this certain point in my career, but we both talk to recruits still. And it's really fun to get to know these guys, like on a personal level, and you go see them and you joke with them or whatever the case might be. And then you see them on the field and see their career for 2, 3, 4 years at a time versus just, look, I love transfers and the way they help the team, but they're a flash in the pan, right? They show up and they're gone. and there's not much, relationship or not much of that there. And we appreciate them. But like I say, you see somebody come in and watch them grow for 2 or 3 or 4 years and know that, man, I used to talk to that kid at school and he loved to eat McDonald's after practice or whatever, just stuff like that. It's different. And it'll be nice to kind of see that for Lanning.
And yeah, just like that point you mentioned there, that's part of the reason I'm so excited for the NFL draft, because each year doing this, you're getting closer and closer to having more guys. Like, this is easily going to be the draft that has the most guys that I've probably selected. I mean, last year, JPJ went, and I think I was one of the first reporters to ever interview him. So that was pretty cool. And just, yeah, the relationship part of it, I'll be able to think back to, I remember when I was in Nashville at On 3 Elite and Decoria Moore was showing up with an Oregon backpack, and everyone was like, oh my God. So super, super excited for that. But yeah, we're gonna cover the heck out of all of it, and we hope you'll be a part of it over at ScoopDuck.com. That's about all we got for you guys today. If you want to find more at Justin, follow him at jhopkinssd on Twitter/X. You can find me anywhere at Torres Sports. Subscribe to the Scoop Duck On 3 YouTube channel and share the show. Thank you so much for all your guys' support, and we'll see you in the next episode of the Ducks Dish podcast.